Brent, let me turn it over to you and let you do your introduction.
All right, well, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the kind invitation, Dave, to be here with you tonight. I've certainly looked forward to this opportunity, and we certainly pray that our time together tonight will be beneficial for you in some way. Just very quickly, I'll just set some very quick context before Dave and I get into this conversation tonight. As Dave said, my wife and I, Diane, she's with me tonight. We are new to the area. We just moved here about 3 months ago. For the express purpose of being part of the work at Florida College. So that purpose is somewhat related tonight, as that effort is intended to create Christian scholars. I wanted to have the opportunity to be part of that, helping the future leaders of our society be able to shine their light as Christians. And so that's the purpose of we're here. We're certainly appreciative of the wonderful, warm welcome that you've given to us. My wife and I attended here last week when Kenny Moore was here, and you were very kind and gracious to us. We enjoyed our visit with you, and certainly glad to be back with you tonight for a few minutes as we talk together. By way of context, we did just move from Southern Indiana. We moved from a wonderful congregation in Southern Indiana where I had the opportunity to serve as a shepherd for the last 11 years and stepped away from that work on our move down here. As part of our time in Indiana, as Dave said, I had the great honor of being part of a Fortune 50 company for the last 33 years. In fact, I'm retiring from that role at the end of this year and have been able to serve in many capacities. And so this topic of being a Christian in the workplace is certainly relevant and certainly one that I've experienced. And so we'll strive to use God's Word as our basis tonight for all that we talk about and all that we do, but share experiences that perhaps you have as you're trying to journey through your career as well. So we look forward to the conversation with you tonight. Dave, thanks for having me tonight.
Thank you, Brent. Well, Brent, as I stated in my opening remarks, this is a topic of great interest among us, and on different levels too. There's many different people in our audience tonight that have jobs in all different facets of our society. They're in leadership roles. We're in individual contributor roles. All sorts of levels. So I think, and this applies to everybody. But I do start off with a question tonight, is what do you think the topic of a Christian in the workplace, particularly as a leader, caught the attention of many? Why do you think that?
Well, I hope that it would cause some interest on our part for a number of reasons. First of all, it's interesting as I was preparing for this, realizing how many times the Bible speaks about godly people in the workplace. Have you thought about all of the examples that we find? Let's start with Joseph, for example. Joseph was at work. He was in a senior leader position, if you will, when he was serving Potiphar, and it was at work that he had his great confrontation with Potiphar's wife that led to his ultimate challenges and problems of being somewhat persecuted for that. We think about Daniel, and Daniel was likewise serving in Babylon at the time, and he was in a role of high prominence, and yet it was at work when Daniel was challenged, when he ended up in the lion's den, was largely because of him being falsely accused while he was at work. We think about Lot. Lot was out doing his work, tending to his livestock, when his employees and Abraham's employees began to be in a conflict. And it was through that ultimately led to Lot choosing to go his way and ultimately his fate of being in Sodom and Gomorrah at that time. We think about Uriah the Hittite, who was diligently doing his work. He was at work when he was caught in the crosshairs of David's schemes to plot against him and ultimately murder him. And it was Uriah that was at work doing his duty diligently at that point in time. So we can go on and on. Jacob's another story when Jacob was diligently working for his uncle Laban when he was caught yet in another scheme of false accusation and lying and cheating. And so it's interesting as we look at God's Word that there are many examples of godly people who are in the work setting when something begins to occur to them or happen to them, I should say, that's a bit challenging. It's also interesting that we know a lot about God's people through their work. We think about Zacchaeus, the tax collector. We think about Lydia, the seller of purple, as a businesswoman. We think about the apostles, and what do we know about the apostles? We know their profession, fishermen and physicians, and tax collectors, and Jesus himself described as the carpenter. And so there's a lot of intersection in God's Word about work and about our workplace and about our role in the workplace. And so first and foremost, I hope this is of interest simply because we find a lot of examples of that in God's Word. But maybe more specifically to your question, I think it also, this topic of our work and what work means to us and what work does to us is somewhat important because of a number of things. First of all, when you're in your working age, you're spending at least a third, if not half of your life at work. And so we think about the challenges of time. We think about the constraints that we have because of work. We think about, and oftentimes Christians are a bit guilty about, at least feel guilty about, I want more time to study, I want more time to pray, I want more time to be able to be involved, I want more time to be able to be hospitable. And yet, oftentimes it's our work that causes those constraints for us. And so we sometimes struggle with just that constraint of time that comes from work. When we think about stress, oftentimes one of the largest sources of stress for us comes from the workplace. Could I just share with you a few statistics that I probably don't have to share because most of you, if you're working, know that this to be true. But 40% of the workers report that their job is extremely stressful. 25% that their job is the number one stress in their lives. That came from a recent survey from stress.org. 41% of workers said stress made them feel less productive. 33% said it made them less engaged. 15% admitted to looking for a new job because of stress. 91% of respondents said that feeling overly whelmed by stress negatively affects their quality of their work. That was a study done by Deloitte. 7 in 10 adults report that the workplace stress affects their personal relationships. 50% of workers bring their work home, causing interference with their personal work life, with their children, and with their spouse. When job satisfaction declines, so does marital satisfaction, proving a strong work-family spillover. That came from Science Direct in 2017. And I could go on with multiple statistics, and I think that we all can relate to that not only do we have time constraints in the workplace as we try to serve as Christians, but we also have distractions that come from the stress that the workplace brings to us. And so we think about that being a challenge. But also, we're faced with some of the most significant temptations while in the workplace as well. Consider just simply the temptation of materialism that we are faced with. We are in a world that people are driven by materialism, and we see that in the workplace on a day in and day out basis. The quest for more, sometimes at all cost, is at play. I read just a statistic as I was preparing for this that it's estimated that $2.6 trillion of the world's GDP comes from unethical behavior or corrupt behavior. So materialism is all around us, and it's a source of temptation. Immoral behavior certainly finds its way into the workplace and is certainly a temptation for us. Many marriages crumble because of that affair that begins in the workplace. Immense pressures to engage in alcohol, or today even drug use in the workplace is so prominent. And so if that's not enough, Dave, we're also finding, as you stated in the outset, we're watching our workplace become the place of social change. What occurred in our universities and higher education places a few decades ago of social change happening within our workplace, or rather in our colleges, we're seeing that in the workplace today. There's immense pressures for Christians confronted with the social change, and I'm referring to social change that is of non-biblical nature, that we're seeing immense pressure upon those at work, those in leadership roles to embrace and to promote. And so I think all of those reasons, Dave, in terms of not only what God says about the workplace and the Bible, but also these issues of time, these issues of stress, these issues of immoral temptations that we find around us, the social change that's before us causes us to have an interest in this topic. And I thank both you and the elders for thinking about this topic. And I was remiss by not thanking the elders for the opportunity to be here tonight, but I appreciate them wanting to have this conversation, because I think that many of us in the workplace struggle with these things, but we don't often come together to talk about them and share and understand that we're all in a journey that has similar patterns.
Thank you, Brent. So let's make this a little realer for some people. You mentioned the fact that we struggle as Christians from time to time. We get discouraged at work. We feel attacked at work many times. We're dealing with the dynamics of work and the social issues at work. Sometimes we have to make hard decisions that stress us in our Christian values. So as a Christian, what are some of the specific ways that you've been challenged with some of these issues at work?
Well, one of the reasons the list that I just gave you was so easy for me is because I've lived all the things I just shared. Certainly, I've had my own challenges with time and stress, dealing with those confrontations and the impact on my family, and those come and go. So certainly, that's been part of the journey that I've been on. I've found myself, certainly, as we've talked about in a few of the biblical examples, falsely accused for those that are trying to seek gain. And so I've found myself in controversies where false accusations have been made against me by others. Certainly false accusations, even from the standpoint that I've had a number of lawsuits brought toward me. None of those were to fruition, but largely because of my beliefs or because of what was considered discriminatory behavior others perceived. And so I've had those types of challenges in the workplace as well. Certainly I've never had the desire to engage in alcohol, but I've certainly been called out because of the pressures of not being engaged in alcohol in the workplace. Any of you that are involved in the workplace know that virtually every social event that goes on, it's expected to be engaged in alcohol. I can share just a quick example of actually being at a session where we were being coached on how to be good leaders and good executives. And so one of the actual sections was what drink to have when you are at a social event. And when I declined to participate in that, I was brought back by the executive coach and said, well, you must engage in this, and if not, I'll give you a list of what appears to be alcoholic drinks so that you can at least look like you're drinking when you're in the event. And I said, no, thank you, I'm not interested. I'll just drink my water if I go to an event. And I was actually dismissed from the coaching session because I would not engage in those matters. So I think all of us have our own stories, but those are the types of things that happen in the workplace all the time, whether it's alcohol, whether it's false accusations, whether it's the lying and cheating that others use in terms of trying to gain. Those are some examples of things that I've experienced. And again, no different than I'm sure many of you could give the same examples of what you've encountered in the workplace also.
Thank you, Brent, for sharing those. There's some specific things I'm sure that everybody has dealt with here. But the key question, how did you protect your Christian position on views and decisions while a company may choose to intentionally change policies and objectives to follow anti-Christian principles? And I've experienced that recently where we've had to deal with the pressures of society, and it just seems like the policies are changing more and more to the point where it puts us in an uncomfortable position, forcing us to almost follow those policies or accept them, but there's still a way to balance that and protect our Christian values and principles. How did you do that?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, and I think that's the key of what we're trying to talk about tonight. And I think it's important not to stand here tonight and share personal opinion, but I'd like to take you to God's Word on a few passages that I think are helpful here. These are certainly helpful for me. These are after 33 years of dealing with this, of how I formulated, how do I go to the workplace and be able to confront these types of challenges? What's the mindset to have? How do we approach those things? I'd like to share with you 4 things, if I might, from God's Word that hopefully will be helpful for you if you're enduring those things as well. The first I would offer to you is that I've learned to embrace the mindset of a soldier. And I take you to Ephesians chapter 6 for a moment. You're familiar with Ephesians 6. I don't have to read it to you. I don't have to share it with you, but I want to just point your attention to it, because I think that Ephesians chapter 6 and Paul's writings here are writings that we know, we can recite, we know the Scripture, but sometimes we fail to maybe apply it the right way or when we need to. When we think about Ephesians chapter 6, this passage comes on the heels of just a wonderful book, an epistle. Paul writes in chapter 1 of Ephesians the wonderful blessings that we've been redeemed by Jesus and the great love that Jesus has for us. In chapter 2, he talks about the fact that through those blessings and through Jesus' redemption, we have great hope and we are made alive. And in chapter 3, he talks about the fact that he himself, Paul, is taking on the stewardship role of sharing the gospel to others because of these great blessings. And then in chapter 4, he talks about how we can enjoy in the Spirit of God. And in chapter 5, he reminds his readers to be imitators in God, for God in all that we do. And he talks about marriage, and he talks about family, and he talks about masters and slaves. And then he says in chapter 6, finally, after all of that, finally, be strong, he says in verse 10, in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you might be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore take up the whole armor of God that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand firm. Stand therefore, having fastened on the belt of truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith, which you can extinguish the flaming darts of the evil one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. I've had the honor, and I think, Dave, you've been fairly close to this same industry. I've had the honor of supporting the United States military in the last 10 years of the role that I've been involved with. And I'm so impressed with the preparation of our military men and women, the preparation that they go into before they even begin to serve in their duty, in their role. And I relate to what I read here in Ephesians chapter 6 just by my context of dealing with members in the military and their great preparation. And so to your question, the first thing I think about when I go into the workplace is I've got to take on the mindset of a soldier. For a long time, I was bothered by the attacks, lawsuits that would come, false accusations that would come, the situations that I would be confronted with from the perspective of what was going on in the workplace, and it bothered me tremendously, saying, why is this happening? But I came back to this passage realizing we've been told this is going to happen, and rather than feeling victimized by it, we have to go into the workplace realizing we are in a battle. And if we do not enter our workplace with a mindset of a soldier, we are going to be defeated and we are going to be deflated. These words should sound strong in our hearts as we enter the workplace. Be strong. Put on the whole armor of God. Be ready to extinguish those flaming darts that come our way. And so the first order of business is to realize we're in a battle, and we are in a battle in the workplace, and that's the battlefield for many of us today. And without taking on that mindset, as I said, we're going to be challenged. But as we think about that heart of a soldier, or that mind of a soldier, I also would encourage us to take on the heart of Paul. And I would point you very quickly to Acts chapter 17. I think this is an amazing passage in Acts chapter 17 in verse 15. I might point you to this. It says, those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and after receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they departed. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Would you just think with me for a moment about the context of this passage? Paul comes to Athens. He's waiting on his companions to come to him, and as he's there, the passage tells us three things. First, he was not enamored by Athens. And that's quite amazing because Athens was a remarkable city at that time. It was the place of great philosophy. It was a great place of arts. It was a great place of economic vitality. It would have been one of those places that you and I would have landed and said, this is a pretty cool place, and want to spend some time and want to really be drawn in. It might be one of those special places perhaps that you might want to go on to a vacation, and Paul lands there. But we don't see any of that in Acts chapter 17. What we see is that Paul wasn't enamored. He didn't get conformed to that area. What it tells us is that he was provoked, or some translations say grieved, by what he saw, because he saw the sin that was around him. He saw the idolatry that was around him. And it was because he was just so torn that people disrespected his God, and people were disrespecting the love that God had for them in their idolatry. And he was provoked because of this. And so what did Paul do there in those two passages? Well, rather than just being enamored with Athens, it said that he first went to the synagogues and he spoke with the devout people. I translate that, he went to be encouraged, and he went to encourage those that were trying to follow after God's Word. I would suggest that's a good takeaway for us when we're thinking about the workplace today. We need each other in these types of settings to encourage one another, to say, I know what you're going through. I understand what it's like, and I want to encourage you, and I need to be encouraged by you. And Paul did that. He went to the synagogues and met with the devout people. But the other thing that Paul did was he went to the marketplace. And I find that interesting. Paul was a tent maker. Paul understood the marketplace. Paul understood what was going on as business was being transacted. And he went there and reasoned and talked with them about his God and about what God has done through Jesus. And I'm encouraged by that, and I'm reminded about that heart, that Paul was grieved enough and upset enough about what he saw that he went to have conversations. He didn't retract. He didn't get angry. He didn't say, why is this happening? He took action. And so I think about that to your question. I think about the fact that we need to think about that in our workplace, that we have the opportunity to be encouraged by one another and then go into that workplace and try to be encouragers to others, talking to them about God rather than retracting. The third thing I would say very quickly, Dave, to your question about how do we handle this in the workplace, we can have the mindset of a soldier, we can have the heart of Paul, but we also have to temper it with the kindness of Peter. And I'm amazed in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, the familiar passage that you are so aware of. I'll back up to verse 13. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 13. Now who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed, having no fear of them, nor be troubled. But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks the reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. Those words sound a bit familiar to us when we think about the workplace today. People that are trying to harm us, people that perhaps want us to suffer for our righteousness' sake or for our beliefs. But the consequences for these folks that Peter was writing to was far worse than what you and I might endure in the workplace. These were the individuals that the Roman government and the Roman soldiers were knocking on their door and saying, do you believe in Christ? And if they believed in Christ, they may suffer minimally being accused of treason of the Roman government, but many of them were drug out of their home that very moment. Many of them were taken and in some way persecuted, if not put to death. And yet Peter says, if they come knock on your door and they ask, are you a Christian? You give them the reason why you believe in Christ, but do so not combatively, not in a way that's confronting them, not even disrespecting them, but you do that with gentleness and with respect. What kindness when we think about the workplace, and what kindness that we should think about when we are confronted with those challenges in our workplace today, reminding what Peter shares with us there. And then if I can just offer one more. I would also offer the patience of those that we find of the Thessalonians in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 10. Paul writes the following, for they themselves report concerning us the kind of reception we had among you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God, and to wait for His Son from heaven, whom He raised from the dead, Jesus who delivers us from the wrath to come. Paul's complimenting the brethren here for their righteousness, and what I love about verse 10, he says that they are waiting for His Son from heaven, whom He raised from the dead, Jesus who will deliver us from the wrath to come. When we go into the workplace, if we can have the mindset of a soldier and realize we're in a battle, if we can go into the workplace and have the heart of Paul and be grieved by what we see and want to do something about it, let it trouble us enough that we are stirred enough, that we care enough about those souls of those others that we'll do something about it. If we have the kindness of Peter when we walk into the workplace and have that wonderful heart to want to be able to share with others our love for Jesus, but with gentleness and with respect, if nothing else, if we can have the patience of the Thessalonians to say, it's in God's hands. They were going to wait on the second coming of Jesus, knowing that the wrath of God, the judgment of God would come at that point, that God will take care of those wrongs that this world offers. And it's not upon us to try to resolve all of those wrongs as we sometimes think we have to do. And so I know that was a long answer, and I appreciate you indulging me, but as I thought about this question considerably, how to share it with you, how might you go into the workplace and be able to confront these matters, I wanted to share with you how I've reconciled it in my mind over these years. And those are the 4 things that I've tried to anchor upon. And hopefully that's helpful.
Very helpful. Brent, thank you very much. And, you know, it's one thing to deal with the challenges and the dynamics of the workplace, but then as Christians, we are constantly looking at our role as a Christian and really our responsibility as a Christian as well. And that's really where the next question comes from. So let's dive a little deeper into, as an employee and a leader in the workplace, many will say, I feel like I just cannot speak out against the worldly views or have Christian conversations, but I do not feel like I can ignore them either. So how should we as Christians deal with these feelings?
Well, that certainly is the hard part of this, and I wish that there was just an easy answer for all of us, but what I would implore you to think about is that when we are confronted with those situations, I think that I would offer, first of all, the spirit of what Peter speaks of in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 18. When we're in the workplace, Peter's given us guidance about the respect we're to have. Servants, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. So the spirit that we show up with at work is this spirit of what we are expected to do in the workplace in terms of our respect. So we're not there to stir up trouble. We're not there to create divisiveness. We're not there to create a spectacle in any shape, form, or fashion. We are there to respect those that we work for. We're to be just and gentle to those that we are confronted with that may be causing that trouble and strife. But I think the answer that I keep coming back to is we must always do what is right despite the consequences. And so in any shape, form, or fashion, not engaging in defending Jesus and defending who Jesus is when we have the opportunity with the right heart, with the right spirit, with the gentleness that we talked about earlier, would not be right, despite the consequences that we have found. And I think we draw back to just the resolve that Jesus had in this matter. And he withdrew in Luke chapter 22, verse 41 and verse 42, and he withdrew from them about a stone's throw and knelt down, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And so I'm reminded by our Lord himself that we must always do right despite the consequences. And so I think about Peter when he was questioned, are you with Jesus? When Jesus was being taken to crucifixion, and Peter said, no, I'm not. I don't want anything to do with it, because he knew the consequences. And I'm reminded of that when we are in the workplace and our Savior is being challenged, and we do not stand up to say what we need to say about what God's love for them, about God's care for them, about God's regard for their soul, then I find that to be very similar to Peter's situation, and we're turning our back on our Lord. Again, I love the young man's prayer at the beginning. I thought that was extremely appropriate, that we go into the workplace with the right heart, the right care, the right love. We're there to help bring people to Christ, not to create division. And so that's what I would offer related to that.
That's great. And recently I've had conversations, even with my daughter, as she's entered the workplace, and and dealing with all the challenges associated with it. I've had recent conversation with even folks in the military and how they've dealt with a lot of the challenges. All of these scenarios or workplaces have different challenges, but we are all faced with the pressures of being a Christian, just in general. So I think this next question is really focused in on, we're dealing with the facets of the workplace, we're dealing with the challenges of the workplace, we're dealing with how do we stand up to the anti-Christian values. But if we were to just take a look at what are the opportunities that we have as a Christian in the workplace as well, what are your thoughts on that?
So I was very fortunate early in my life to be introduced to actually preaching the gospel. So I started preaching at 18, never preached full-time, but have always in some form or fashion been in an opportunity to be able to preach from time to time or to hold gospel meetings. And so early in my career, I struggled tremendously with, what am I doing in the workplace? I need to be preaching. I should be full-time preaching. And I had that struggle early on, which I'm certain many of you can relate to. And it was a few years into that struggle and that guilt of, I should be full-time preaching. Why am I wasting my time in the workplace? I had a conversation with another evangelist who really helped me tremendously. And he said, Brent, I come into the church building every Monday morning, and I work here all week long, and I have some Bible classes on Wednesday night, and I get to teach a class on Sunday morning, and I stand in front of a pulpit in front of our congregation on Sunday morning, and I have Bible studies through the week with people. But he said, you leave on Monday morning, and you are engaged with hundreds of people through the week. In your hometown, your business travel, look at all the people that you come into contact with. He said, do you not understand your opportunity to shine the light is so much more than mine? And so take that thought and embrace that thought and use that opportunity that God's given you through the interactions that you have to be able to do that. And that flipped a switch for me. And it helped me to really be able to realize the opportunity that we do have in the workplace. And that was very, very helpful for me to realize that God's Word and God's light is so desired and so needed in the workplace today. I'm amazed back to Acts chapter 17 again that Paul went to the marketplace. God always is very intentional with what He tells us, and the fact that He shares with us that Paul, when he was grieved in Athens, went to the marketplace tells us something. That's where God's Word is needed. That's where the opportunity is. Where, as we said earlier, a lot of corruption actually occurs from time to time. There's people who need the gospel, and so that was helpful for me, and I would encourage anyone here in the workplace to realize you've been placed there and you have a great opportunity to evangelize just by who you are and how you live your life and how you go about your engagement in the workplace. It's been said it's the mission field of today, the workplace is. We oftentimes think about we need to go off into a foreign land someplace to preach the gospel, and there's goodness in that, and we need to do that. But the mission field is when you walk through the front door of your company every Monday morning and the opportunity that you have to be able to preach the wonderful story of redemption, the wonderful story of reconciliation, the wonderful story of our sanctification, the wonderful story that we have of the justification that Christ has given us. And so we have wonderful opportunities to shine our light and be what God has asked us to be, what Christ has asked us to be, and shining our light and being the light upon a hill. And I think that happens on Monday morning in the office. And so I would hope that we would embrace that opportunity that we all are given to be able to do so.
Wow. That's great. Thank you, Brent. We're going to pivot here in just a minute to allow maybe the audience with a few questions, but I would like to go off script maybe a little bit. Knowing that you were at a vice president level and also an elder in the church, did you ever feel like you were in a position where you were going to lose your job because of a position that you took?
I don't know that I've ever felt like I would actually have lost my job. I haven't been confronted necessarily with that. Certainly, the potential was there. Certainly, the opportunity to be criticized for that was present. But I've never had that conversation directly where you have the ultimatum. So I was never that close to that confrontation. But certainly knew that it was in the vicinity.
Yeah. And maybe the reason I asked that question is because did you have the faith at the time to know that it just did not matter if you'd lost your job?
Well, that's why this gets so difficult, because when you're feeding a family and you are caring for your family, it's easy to stand here in a pulpit and talk about do the right thing until you're confronted with that challenge. And that's why we have to have that mindset of a soldier going in before we get into that situation. If we're not prepared that we're in that battle and to make the right decision, then we're not going to make the right decision at that moment. And so I think your question's a wonderful one. I would love to say that I think I would have the faith, but it is, as I said, I struggle like everyone else has, and it is a difficult challenge in the world today. Whether it's in the workplace or some of the other social settings we find ourselves in with what's going on, particularly as we watch the liberal movement of our country away from godly principles. But I encourage us all, myself included, to continue to build that faith. That's why we're here for. That's why we come to worship. That's why we come to study God's Word. It really gets to how we've wired ourselves. And so we like to talk about the fact that we should have habits every day that are building our faith. We should have the connections of people that we're able to engage with that continue to help strengthen that faith. And our actions each day should be trying to help establish that faith. And so without doing that repetitive cycle, we're not going to be prepared for that moment when we're confronted with that.
Yeah. And I think in relation to, I've heard other folks say this as well, when we're in the congregation setting here, we feel safe. We can talk amongst ourselves, but when we leave here and we enter into that world, we're in that constant battle. So I think certainly all of us probably feel that way when we're in the workplace.
I would add really quickly, if I could, since we're off script, just to say part of that, I think, part of that reaction that we get from the workplace and how much latitude we have is what work we do to create a brand or a reputation for ourselves in the workplace. And I think that when you work very hard, and that's a biblical principle as well, our name is to be had above riches. And so if we are working to have a good reputation, that we are doing our work, we're doing it well, we are treating people with respect, we're not causing trouble, we're fulfilling what we read in 1 Peter, that we're to have the respect for those that we work for, that helps us have latitude in the workplace, particularly when we're viewed in a favorable light as being a good person who's trying to do good things. And so that's part of managing those situations, is the work that we do in terms of how we interact with others along the line to get there and treating people with respect.
Sure. Thanks. All right, so let's open it up for any questions. Anybody have any questions in the audience? Yes.
So appreciate this format and discussion. Very much appreciate it. We've talked a lot about social issues and kind of from a 30,000-foot view. If you don't mind and indulge me maybe a little bit, I'd like to get specific maybe with just one. And the reason I'm asking this is because I know that there's people in this audience sitting here tonight that are dealing with it. And it's very pervasive in the workplace right now. And that's gender issues. And we're being asked as leaders to participate in this, to write memos, to use the verbiage that these things are, that they're purveying, and how do we handle that? Because we're right smack dab in the middle of it, and it's so in our face in the workplace right now. How do we deal with that as from a leader's perspective, please?
Sure. You want to start, or you want me to?
You go right ahead, Brent. You have much more experience in this than I do.
No, you're exactly right. So we're dealing with that in a number of situations. It's coming very hard and heavy, of course, legislatively. So we're in an environment right now where the current administration is pushing rules almost weekly along those matters for what the workplace is to engage in. So there's no doubt about that it's a very challenging time. From a perspective of engagement and promotion of that, again, I stand back to where I was earlier. I have chosen to remove myself from those situations. I've not engaged in the promotion of whether it's transgender issues, whether it's homosexuality issues, whether it's Pride Month issues, things along those lines. I have not engaged in those and have chosen to withdraw from that. I will have that respectful conversation with a leader if it comes up, have chosen to take the stance not to do so. But I agree with you. It is becoming, the line is getting blurred because it's not just a matter of, in the business world perspective and company's perspective, it's not now just a matter of opinion. It's now become a matter of law in many regards. You mentioned talking with military. We're watching that come down through the military very heavily. We're watching it come through healthcare. I'm retiring out of the healthcare field, and so laws that are demonstrating what is health care and who is eligible for health care and what type of health care, for example, who will pay for surgeries to change gender, and all those things are being pushed down pretty dramatically right now. So it is certainly a significant issue. I would agree. It's a complex issue.
I'll share my thoughts, and if anybody else has any thoughts on this. I haven't felt like I've been pinpointed to make a decision that has crossed the line at this point. But I have dealt with challenges of inclusion and diversity. You know, that's the term that's used in my workplace. And the way I've held the line on that is I've just felt like given the job or the role to the best person that is right for the job. And that's sort of the line I've taken. And not to get into debating the other situations that I may get in. I feel like it's a safe line, but I've not been challenged beyond that until this point. So if I get to that point, I think I'll do a lot of praying, and I'll just have faith in God.
I think that's a very good response, Dave. And I'll just add one other quick thing to that and see if there's any other questions. So in terms of inclusion and diversity, I actually voluntarily joined the Inclusion and Diversity Board as a sponsor so that I could sponsor inclusion and diversity that is healthy and makes sense for I think for a company, helping to bring development for more female leaders, for example, to help in areas where employees can be developed so they have more opportunities for skill sets that they need to develop. And so, engaging to say, I will promote inclusion and diversity, but inclusion and diversity that draws the line from those areas that, begin into a non-biblical environment. But demonstrating that, I am there to be productive and help people, again, the best people get the job for the roles that are available and helping to develop them from that perspective.
But I think that example right there shows that you led with being the example and helping to make those decisions is an important element to that. Okay, any questions? JP.
As a young father, I want to be able to teach my children to be diligent workers, to work hard as working unto the Lord, and yet I also want to teach them to seek first the kingdom of God, and that the things that are in this earth that you might earn from hard work, they don't matter at all. What is your advice on being able to teach our children that, you want to be a diligent worker, but also your work doesn't really matter because we're striving for eternal spiritual things?
That's a wonderful question. Let me take it.
Go right ahead.
I'll share with you a passage that comes to mind with that. Your question's a really good one because even more so than some of the issues we've talked about, the social issues, transgender issues, the things that we know on the front of our mind right now, materialism to me is one of the biggest things I've confronted in my 33 years. I have watched time and time again individuals making decisions that are so driven only by their opportunity to gain material wealth and corrupt behavior, unethical behavior, at all costs to gain power and prestige and title and the money that comes with it. So I think that's a really huge issue for our children today. And what comes to mind is in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, kind of an unlikely passage, but there's an interesting story there that you're probably familiar with, and we don't have time to get into it, but the first 7 verses of 1 Chronicles chapter 21, David, it says that Satan entered into David and David asked his right-hand man to perform a census across all the land. And his right-hand man says, no, I'm not going to do the census. He goes, no, you're going to go do the census. And they have a big battle, and ultimately David, as the king, wins out. And then we watch what happens. God is extremely upset with that, and there's multiple repercussions because of that decision of taking that census. And many die, and God's wrath is quite significant. And you step back and say, why in that passage would God be so upset because David wanted a census? But if you really study that passage, and I think it gets to your point, there were 3 questions that David was asking. How much do I have? Do I have enough? And can I get more? Now, he was talking about it in terms of his men and his army and how strong he was, but that carries over so much in the workplace today that we are driven to say, how much do I have? Do I have enough? And can I get more? And it drives us and motivates us into unhealthy situations oftentimes. And so, to your point, continuing to teach your children exactly what you've just stated is so critical, because our culture is all driven around the materialism and the money and what comes with that. I think it has to be continual teaching of God's Word, continuing to talk about the kingdom, talking about what all scriptures our God has given to us, and teaching like what happened to David there in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, being punished because of his real materialism and focus upon the secular strength that he had, as opposed to putting his trust in God. But it's a wonderful question. What would you add to that?
Well, I would add, certainly as I look at my own career and the drive that I've had, one of the things I've always kept in my mind is, if I lost my job and I lost everything I have, would I still be happy? Would my family still be happy? Would I still have the faith that I have? And I would say yes. That's been the mindset that I've had. Now, if I was in that position, it'd be possibly a different story, but I think I would be able to, and Libby reminds me all the time that one of the happiest times in our lives is when we first got married and we lived in a one-bedroom apartment. And we think back to that day when we didn't have much at all. And could I go back to that time? Could I work at McDonald's or Chick-fil-A and make just enough money to get by in a one-bedroom apartment? And I'd say, yes, I could. And would I still be happy with my family? And I would say, yes, I could. So just, that reminding of my, in the situation that I could be in, that I could lose everything and still be happy, and knowing that I'm still going to heaven. So that's just a mindset that I've had my whole life. Yes. Sure.
So work-life balance discussions are always prominent, but you as a shepherd flock for, what was it, 11 years you said? So you had the added demands on your time, not only as a member of the local church, but helping shepherd that local church. And I'm wondering, could you give advice, particularly to our younger, we have a large 20-something group that's now in the workforce, we have a large college population that's entering the workforce. What advice do you give them about maintaining the proper balance, where work is in its proper place, but family is where it should be, and also your spiritual family is where it should be?
Thank you, Josh, for the question, and it's an important question. First of all, it requires an intentionality. You must prioritize your life. It's not going to prioritize it for you. And so sitting down and having those questions, those conversations with your family, Diane and I, made the determination we were always going to make sure we had a family dinner, regardless of what was happening. And sometimes that family dinner happened at 11 o'clock at night, literally. But we would have that family dinner to make sure that was part of our routines as we were raising our 3 children. It is a discipline of really prioritizing your spiritual life. Again, we talk about it from the pulpit all the time. It's when you apply it, it's important. I encourage our young people to get into that mindset now, to begin to realize that you must prioritize. It's exciting to get a career. It's exciting to get a new job. You want to move up the ladder. You want to be able to make a name for yourself. But I go back to what we talked about with Paul a while ago. Don't get enamored with this world. Don't get enamored. He didn't get enamored with Athens. Don't get enamored with the world. I think that's why Paul wrote in Romans chapter 12, 1 and 2, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed. And so it requires us not to fall into the trap. The world will pull us into that cycle of making sure we're too stressed, making sure we're too busy, That's Satan at work, by the way. That's the way he disassembles the church. I can tell you as a shepherd, more often than not, the problems that we dealt with were family-related problems, and more often than not, they were because of something around this issue of people not having time to build their relationships, to rear their children, and the sacrifices are just too great. So intentionality is the first piece of this. The second is you've got to have that spiritual mindset within the workplace or in the home place, and again, prioritizing that. That we are going to ensure that time for God, time for hospitality, time for caring for others, time for giving is part of what we do, and that's just as important as our workplace. But there's not a perfect answer to that. At least I don't have a perfect answer to that, other than it was just an intentional development of our habits to make sure that we had time for one another, to make sure we made time for what was important, making sure that we pushed aside the competing demands of work so that those times could be in play. And Dave, I know you deal with that right now, so I don't know if you'd have maybe a better answer than mine.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay. I appreciate the question, though, and again, I encourage our young people to think about that. We sometimes, when we're coaching young people to think about being good business people, we oftentimes talk about there's some business folks who say, to be a good employee, you've got to have thinking time. You've got to carve time out of your calendar that you can just reflect, that you can think about what's happened, that you can process, so that you can then go back and be creative in the workplace. But that really applies into our entire life. We've got to have that thinking time. Again, it gets back to what I said earlier. Our habits have to be formed. What are the habits going to be? How do we prioritize our Bible reading? How do we prioritize our prayer? How do we prioritize our family time? Our connections, who we spend time with will fuel that. If we get connected to everybody at work and everybody in the world and we're not connected with strong relationships, we're going to allow those relationships of the world and at work to pull us away. And so we really have to get into those habits and really into those connections and make sure we're building our life around those, and that'll help course correct when we get out of bounds with those guardrails.
Absolutely. That's why we have the church. Well, we are coming up to the top of the hour here at 6 o'clock, but I'd first of all like to say thank you very much. I could talk for the rest of the night and asking questions here, but we do have to wrap it up. I will ask this final question. Are there anything or any advice that you could give us in just closing on this topic?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you again for the elders and for your kind invitation to be with you tonight. I pray that something maybe said done tonight was beneficial. I know this is a little bit of a non-conventional Sunday evening, but I applaud and certainly commend the fact that you wanted to have this conversation tonight, and hopefully it was helpful. It's a conversation that I think is much needed. My advice would be to just go back to remembering what is at stake. Anytime that you are confronted with those challenges at work, anytime you're confronted with the struggles of the stress that the workplace brings, anytime you're confronted with the challenges that the time of our busy lives brings us, please go back to what's at stake. Our God has a home for us in heaven that is so far much better than what we're dealing with here. And every day that we flirt with the world, and every day that we flirt with our workplace, and every day that we flirt with the temptations that brings, we are jeopardizing that wonderful home that our God has provided for us and our Lord has died for us. And so if we can just stay connected on that wonderful, wonderful hope and what our Lord has done for us, and be reminded that we are risking that when we let the world pull us into its fray, then that would be my advice, that I think we will come back to the right answer. We'll be able to face the issues that we're dealing with that are very difficult, whether they're legislative or whether they're societal. We'll be able to deal with the challenges that we're confronted with in terms of how we help our young people understand the financial focus and to work hard and provide for our own, but not to be driven by the money. We'll find the ways not to have an imbalance where we're not taking care of our family and we're not taking care of our spiritual life and we're not taking care of our church family. All those things we'll come into the right area when we continue to go back and realize what's at stake and what our God has offered to us. And so we hope that that'll be encouragement to continue to stay focused and not to be pulled into what this world and what Satan wants us to be pulled into. But thank you for having me tonight.
Brent, thank you so much, very, very much for your time, for your wisdom. Covered a lot of ground tonight. Left us with a lot of good thoughts and principles. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So we'll wrap it up here. We'll do, are there any final announcements from the elders that need to be made before we close? Please note that if you did not get a chance to partake of the Lord's Supper, that it will be offered in this room over here at the end of service. And we have a closing prayer. Do we have a closing prayer tonight? Okay. All right. Dylan, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and do our closing prayer, and we'll be dismissed at that time.